Julia laughed so hard she almost snorted wine through her nose. Across the table, Nathan beamed, his perfect veneers practically reflecting the candlelight. I watched her touch his forearm again, second time that evening. "Remember when we got locked out of the dorm and had to sleep on the roof?" she said, gripping his wrist like it was a damn lifeline. Nathan chuckled like a man who knew he was still wanted. I stared at my steak, now cold, and smiled like a man who knew better. Every man past 60 has done this dance. Sat through a dinner where you're the ghost in your own home, while your wife giggles like she's 17 again at some tanned relic from her past who suddenly just happened to be in town. But this wasn't just some dinner. This was a full audition for a part I didn't know she'd been casting. Nathan dominated every breath in the room. She leaned in for every word. I said little. I just watched. My fork scraped the plate once. That was enough to get her to flinch. When he finally left, 2 hugs, one "you really haven't aged too many," Julia turned to me like I'd ruined Christmas. "You were rude tonight. You embarrassed me." I asked him how long he was staying. "That's rude? You acted like a jealous teenager. He's a friend who used to sleep in your bed." She crossed her arms. "You're being paranoid. It's all your work lately. You're projecting." Ah, classic. She wasn't cheating. I was delusional. That's always the warm-up before the knockout. She stood taller. "I want you to call him and apologize." I actually laughed. "You want me to say sorry to him? If you don't, I'm leaving." I stood, walked to the desk in the corner, opened the second drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope. The seal was unbroken. The ink was fresh. I laid it on the dining table. Calm, clean. "Just sign the papers first." Her eyes twitched. "What papers?" "You said you'd leave if I didn't apologize. I'm holding you to it." She blinked like I'd spoken in Morse code. "This is some joke, right? Open it." She didn't move. Her jaw did, though, clenched hard enough to crack a molar. The envelope just sat there between us, this quiet, loaded thing she hadn't expected. That's when I realized how long I'd been waiting for this moment. Not to catch her, not to expose her, but just to stop pretending that I didn't see what she was doing. You ever reach the edge of tolerance so calmly it surprises you? That was me. No yelling, no plate throwing, just a pen and a stack of neatly prepared truths. And hey, before we go any further, can I ask a small favor? If you're still here, hit that subscribe button. 97% of you don't, and it helps the team keep telling stories that matter, like this one. Back to the story. Julia stared at the envelope like it might hiss. "Mark," she said slowly, "this is ridiculous. He's just a friend. I was just asking you to be the bigger person." "Oh, I am," I said, sipping my now lukewarm coffee. "You just don't like what that looks like." She reached for the envelope, then stopped. I saw the panic creeping in. Not fear of losing me? No. Fear of losing the scaffolding she'd built around her life. My bank account, my house, the safe and boring guy she could keep around while flirting with ghosts from her past. And Nathan. Let's not forget Golden Boy Nathan, the man who understood her, the man who, according to her, was just being friendly when he sent her a birthday bracelet that matched the one he gave her in 2005. Totally normal. She suddenly laughed, a brittle, humorless thing. "So this is what it's come to? You're divorcing me because I asked you to apologize?" "No," I said, standing up. "I'm divorcing you because you thought I would." I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there with her mouth slightly open and one hand hovering above the envelope like it might detonate. I didn't slam the door, didn't yell. I just let the silence hit her like a closing casket. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I was finally done pretending I didn't know who she really was. She stood there for a full 30 seconds like her internal hard drive was trying to reboot. Then, with a scoff that sounded rehearsed, she grabbed the envelope and tore it open like she was about to find a Valentine's Day card. The laughter that followed was brittle, high-pitched, and just a few decibels shy of unhinged. "You're joking," she said, flipping through the stack of papers. You printed divorce papers?" I didn't even blink. "No joke. You just gave me the push I needed." She looked up sharply, eyes wide like she was seeing me for the first time. I could almost hear the gears grinding behind her forehead, trying to reframe this into something she could control. There it was, the dawning realization that the man she'd underestimated for years might not be playing checkers after all. Her fingers hesitated over the page marked Clause 12, Prenuptial Enforcement. That one hit her hard. The clause she'd laughed off during our honeymoon, saying, "Only men who expect to lose need prenups." Guess who was laughing now? She snapped the folder shut and slammed it on the table. "This is manipulation. You're trying to scare me into submission. I'm not signing anything." I leaned back in the chair. "You don't have to sign tonight." "But the clock's ticking." Julia's face flushed. "This isn't happening. You're blowing everything up over one comment." Dinner. "You're paranoid, Mark. Everyone says you overthink everything." "Then maybe they should marry you next," I said, cool as ice. And with that, she stormed out. No suitcase, no toothbrush, not even her phone charger. Just her coat, her pride, and a bag of righteous indignation. She slammed the door so hard it rattled the cabinet handles. I waited exactly 7 seconds before dialing. The line connected. "It's time," I said. "Initiate the exit strategy." The voice on the other end didn't ask for clarification, just said understood and hung up. I poured myself a glass of scotch, not to celebrate but to steady my hands. You'd think after preparing for this moment for so long I'd be immune to the adrenaline, but even a chess master's fingers twitch when the king finally topples. I walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the driveway was already dark. Her car was gone. I wasn't worried. The key fob wouldn't get her far. I'd updated the software weeks ago. An immobilizer code hidden inside a regular maintenance update. She'd think it was a glitch. She'd call me. I wouldn't answer. She didn't know that the joint account was already under review, that my lawyer, who she thought was just our tax guy, had drafted a full severance package outlining exactly what she was entitled to. Spoiler alert, not much. And the rental? Already reassigned. Her name would be on a lease by morning, but no utilities in mind. I wanted her comfortable enough to fall, but alone enough to feel the floor when she hit it. She always thought she had time, that I was too passive, too invested in us. She mistook consistency for weakness, familiarity for compliance. But what she didn't see, what most manipulators never do, is the quiet buildup of a man deciding not to flinch anymore. By the time she called her sister that night, crying on a borrowed phone and saying he actually did it, he actually filed, I was already reviewing the second phase. Emails were being sent. A few photos discreetly removed from shared albums. My emergency key, hidden in the vent behind the bathroom mirror, was now at my brother's house. I was burning the bridge with blueprint precision. And the best part? I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to threaten. I didn't even have to raise my voice. Because when a man is prepared for betrayal, really prepared, his silence becomes the most terrifying sound in the room. Julia came back the next morning like it was all just an overdue argument. You know that kind of entitled knock, the kind that says, "Let me in so I can fix this by pretending nothing happened." Yeah, that one. She rang the bell, then knocked, then rang again like she thought repetition would change reality. It didn't. She reached for her key, shoved it in the lock, and twisted. Nothing. She tried again, harder, yanked, slammed her palm on the door. Still nothing. That was when the panic started to settle in. It wasn't in the way she banged. It was in the silence that followed. Then came the jiggling of the handle like maybe she could force it with sheer nostalgia. "Mark!" she shouted through the door. "Open up, this is ridiculous." Silence. She pounded harder. "You changed the locks? Are you serious?" Still nothing. And then she saw it taped to the living room window in clean block letters on a single sheet of paper. "Keys revoked, access frozen, exit clear. No, dear Julia, no love, Mark. Just cold logistics, like a system shutdown notice." Her face twisted into disbelief, and she pulled out her phone, her last weapon. She dialed the bank. First the joint account, declined, then the emergency savings. Frozen, then her own card, overdrawn. One by one, she realized everything she leaned on wasn't hers. It was ours, and now it was mine again. She ran to the driveway, frantically clicking her car fob. Nothing. Dead. She opened the door manually, sat in the driver's seat, and pressed start. Silence. Not even the dash lights. It wasn't a battery issue. It was the immobilizer I'd installed last month, masked under a security upgrade. She screamed inside the car, slapped the steering wheel, kicked the floor mat, probably expected me to come running out like some broken husband still craving her approval. I didn't. Instead, I was upstairs in the study, calmly watching the footage from the doorbell cam. No audio, just video. Her hands in her hair, her pacing, her attempt to tear the letter off the glass. It didn't even come off clean. She ripped half and gave up, left the other half like a stain. Eventually, she gave up and called her sister. 20 minutes later, a dusty old Corolla pulled up, and Julia got in, face red, shoulders curled inward like a child sent home from school. She didn't even look back at the house. Later that evening, her sister told me, through mutual friends, that Julia showed up sobbing. "He locked me out of everything," she cried. "I just told him to apologize, that's all." But her sister? She said nothing. That silence cut deeper than anything I could have said, because her sister knew what Julia refused to admit. This wasn't about one dinner or one man. It was about all the times she pretended disrespect was casual, that her actions were innocent, that her games didn't have consequences. Back at the house, I deleted her fingerprint from the front door keypad, logged out all shared apps, killed her access to the streaming accounts, the grocery card, the gym membership, every small piece of routine that made her life smooth. Erased. It wasn't revenge, it was arithmetic. You take out trust, and the equation collapses. I made tea, sat on the couch, listened to nothing. There's a kind of peace that comes after months of doubt, after years of telling yourself, maybe it's just me, when you finally realize it was never just you. It was her, always her, and she thought you'd never call the bluff. Julia sat in a beige leather chair that squeaked every time she shifted, across from a woman in a tailored navy suit who didn't blink much and didn't waste words. The office was cold, clinical, with that faint smell of laser-printed paper and bitter coffee. On the desk between them sat a thick manila folder, unlabeled, heavy. The lawyer, Elaine Mercer, divorce and family law, 22 years of calm destruction under her belt, folded her hands. "Your prenup is airtight," she said. "Signed, notarized, and reaffirmed 5 years ago during the mortgage refinancing." Julia blinked. "Wait, I thought we—" "You re-signed," Elaine said plainly. "It's in the records." "I didn't know. He said it was just a mortgage form." Elaine didn't react. "That was his first step. He's 3 ahead now." Julia swallowed, shifting in the chair. "So, what am I entitled to?" Elaine pushed the folder across the table. "This'll explain why that question is going to sting." Julia hesitated, then opened it. Inside, stills from a restaurant security footage. Her leaning across a dimly lit table toward Nathan, her hand touching his face. A wine glass in front of each of them. Different dates, multiple locations, multiple dresses. Next, a hotel receipt. 2 rooms booked, but only 1 charged. In Nathan's name. No travel conference listed. Just 2 nights. Boston. Then, screenshots. Her messages. His replies. "I miss this, us. I know. But he's been suspicious lately. I have to be careful. You could always stay another night." Her handwriting and a scanned note. "Happy birthday." My favorite almost. With a pressed flower taped to the page. The final page? A summary from a private investigator. A neat timeline. Cross-referenced with photos. Bank records. Travel logs. Julia's mouth parted, but no sound came out. "He knew," Elaine said, tone unchanged, "all along." Julia's instinct was to deny. "This is all being twisted. Nathan and I were friends. Flirty sometimes, okay? But we never—" Elaine raised a brow. "You want me to pretend I believe that? Or do you want real legal advice?" Julia shrank. "This is war. He's trying to bury me." "No," Elaine said. "He's already buried you. You just didn't notice the dirt piling up." For the first time since this all began, Julia went quiet. Her defenses, usually so quick, so agile, fell flat. What could she say? That the bracelet Nathan gave her last fall wasn't romantic? That she didn't know Mark had seen the bank alert for the $800 dinner at that rooftop restaurant she never told him about? She closed the folder. Her hands trembled slightly. Why didn't he confront me? Why gather all this? Elaine didn't even look up from her notes. Because confrontation gives you a stage, but this? This is execution. Julia pressed her palms against her thighs to stop the shaking. He was planning this? People like him don't react, they build. Elaine's voice was clinical, cold. You spent years chipping away at his dignity, and you assumed he'd keep patching the cracks. But some men don't patch, some men sharpen. Julia clutched the folder to her chest like it might shield her. Her thoughts raced. Had Nathan saved those messages? Had Mark bugged the house? Did he tell anyone? The silence around her answered. He didn't have to. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't accused. He'd just waited until her lies fit neatly into the timeline he'd built without her ever noticing. That was the moment it hit her. She hadn't just lost control. She never had it to begin with. Julia thought that if she just explained things, her version, the softer version, people would rally around her. That's how it always went before. She was charming, articulate, good at playing the victim, just enough to stir empathy, but never suspicion. It had worked with friends, with coworkers, even with a therapist or two. But this time, something was off. The ground didn't move the way she expected. She started small, emails to mutual acquaintances, former dinner party regulars, the couples they'd vacationed with. Mark misunderstood, she wrote. It all got out of hand. I was emotional. She painted Nathan as a harmless ghost, her behavior as a side effect of a marriage that had been emotionally distant for years. She used the phrase emotional neglect more than once. The responses trickled in, thin, clinical, evasive. I hope things work out for you both. That sounds complicated. We're keeping you in our thoughts. No one asked if she was okay. No one asked what Mark had done. Then came the silence. Emails left unread. Texts Mark delivered but never responded to. Even the people she thought were hers, Mark's secretary, the couple from his squash club, the accountant's wife who once cried on her shoulder over a miscarriage, no one replied. It wasn't until she reached out to Kevin, one of Mark's old coworkers, that she got something different. He replied with one line, "You shouldn't have pushed him. He gave you years." That was it. No greeting, no sign-off, just a verdict. Julia sat on her sister's couch, rereading it 10, 12 times. She tried crafting a response, some righteous retort. You don't know the full story, or he's not as innocent as he looks. But everything sounded hollow. So instead, she closed the app and did something she hadn't dared to do in weeks. She wrote Mark directly. It wasn't short. She spent 2 hours on it, pausing every few sentences to cry or pace or backspace. She called it an honest letter, like some kind of redemption arc. She wrote about confusion, about how she didn't mean for things to escalate. She claimed she never crossed a physical line with Nathan, just emotional boundaries. She confessed to being flattered by the attention, to feeling invisible at times. She said, "You stopped holding my hand years ago, and I wish I had told you I was lonely instead of pretending I wasn't." She ended it with a plea, "Please talk to me, even once. I need to know if there's anything left worth saving." She stared at it for a while before hitting send. He responded 6 minutes later, "Send it to someone who needs it. I don't." No Julia, no signature, just that. She dropped the phone. Literally. It clattered onto the hardwood, screen still glowing. For a moment, she just sat there, hands slack, chest hollow. This wasn't the Mark she remembered. This wasn't the man who used to fix the jammed printer even when she'd shouted at him 10 minutes earlier. This wasn't the guy who brought her tea when she had migraines, or who'd once written her a note on a napkin after a fight that said, "I don't know how to stop loving you even when I try." This version of Mark, he didn't try anymore. And the worst part, she didn't even know when he stopped. She cried, then screamed, then cried again, because it wasn't just her marriage that had ended. It was her power, her script, the story where she's misunderstood but forgiven. That version of events, canceled. The tables hadn't just turned, they'd been flipped, and she had nowhere left to sit. When Mark shut the door, Julia turned to the one person she was sure would open his, Nathan. It made sense in her mind. He had always been there with those knowing glances and gentle reassurances. "You deserve to feel seen," he once told her over oysters and too much wine. "If Mark can't handle your light, maybe he's not the one meant to catch it." Smooth, slick, just suggestive enough to be flattering without fully crossing the line. She had clung to that line like a lifeline, her emotional affair with plausible deniability. So when her inbox froze and her friends went silent, Julia turned to the only man who had ever made her feel both desired and validated in one sentence. She dialed. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. She texted, "Hey, can we talk?" No response. She waited a few hours, then called again. Blocked. Her breath caught in her throat, not from heartbreak, but from humiliation. She pulled up his Instagram. Gone. Searched from her sister's phone, still there, still active, blocked. She switched to email, sent a short, desperate line. I need you right now. The reply came an hour later, but not from Nathan. It was from an unfamiliar Gmail address. Just one sentence. Please do not contact my husband again. No name. But it didn't have to be signed. She knew who it was. Nathan's wife. Apparently, the messages, screenshots, call logs, even an old video from her phone had made their way into the wrong hands. Or maybe the right ones. Julia stared at her screen, hand trembling, face burning with something deeper than shame. Rage. Not at herself, of course, never that. At him. Nathan had vanished, disappeared into the mist like a magician mid-trick, leaving her holding the sawed-in-half box. And the audience? They weren't applauding. They were walking out. She called one of her old girlfriends, someone who used to joke that Nathan was her backup husband. The call went through. Did you know Nathan blocked me? Julia asked, voice high and tight. A pause, then a soft reply. His wife found the messages. He's in damage control. Julia laughed, a single sharp bark. Of course he is. You should probably lay low for a while, her friend added, hesitant. Julia blinked. Why should I lay low? Another pause. Because right now, you're kind of radioactive. That line stuck. Radioactive. Not heartbroken, not misunderstood, just dangerous to be near. She hung up and stared at her reflection in the black screen of her phone. For the first time in weeks, her hair wasn't done. Her makeup from earlier had smudged. She looked tired, older, not tragic, just exposed. Her fallback was gone. Her husband had erased her. Her lover had ghosted her. And everyone else? They were watching her unravel and carefully stepping out of the blast radius. That night, she sat alone on her sister's balcony, wrapped in a coat that wasn't hers, staring at a street she didn't recognize, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this was what it felt like to be abandoned by the people you thought you could always call at midnight. Julia had built a life on soft manipulations, emotional leverage, people who would forgive first and ask questions later. But now, no one was answering, and even the ones who did weren't picking sides. They were watching the game end, and she wasn't even a player anymore. It was a breast cancer fundraiser. Black ties, long gowns, champagne that tasted expensive but flat, the kind of event Julia used to glide through like royalty. She hadn't RSVP'd, she didn't need to. Her name still opened a few doors, or so she thought. She walked in, wearing a navy dress she once said was her good luck charm, heels that clicked with authority, and a carefully curated smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd spent an hour rehearsing her posture, her expression, even her tone. She didn't come to beg. She came to remind people who she was. And then she saw him. Mark, across the ballroom, near the silent auction table, deep in conversation with two executives she didn't recognize. He looked different. Crisp charcoal suit, no tie, jaw freshly shaven, hair neatly parted. He held a glass of something amber and laughed at a joke she didn't hear. But what hit her hardest wasn't the suit or the posture or even the easy way he stood. It was the weight that was missing from him. The heaviness she'd always blamed on work or stress or maybe even her, it was just gone. She froze mid-step, half smile caught in place, then moved forward. She rehearsed a dozen openers. Nice suit, long time, can we talk? None of them made it out, because just as she stepped within arm's length, Mark shifted slightly, as if guided by radar. He stepped away, effortlessly, naturally, not rudely, just enough to make it clear she was furniture in his peripheral vision. He didn't look at her, not even once. Did he see her? Oh yes, she was sure of it. But he didn't acknowledge her. That was worse. A woman next to Julia, maybe mid-30s, toward a gray-haired man sipping scotch, whispered something behind a half-covered mouth. Isn't that his ex-wife? The man tilted his head slightly, glanced her way, then shrugged. She was. Briefly. The word hit like glass on tile. Briefly, like she was a chapter, not a character, a footnote in a life story that had already moved on. Julia turned toward the bar, pretending she was thirsty, ordered something she couldn't pronounce. Took a sip and nearly gagged. She wasn't here to drink. She was here to see if she still mattered. She didn't. She watched as Mark talked with ease, smiles, nods, light touches on shoulders. A younger woman in a green satin dress leaned in closer to him at one point, not flirtatious, comfortable, familiar. Julia stood there, alone in the crowd, invisible in a dress that once commanded attention. Not a soul approached, not a hug, not a, "Julia, how have you been?" A man passed by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. She reached for one, then changed her mind. What was she even doing? This wasn't her ballroom anymore. She wasn't just excluded from his life. She'd been erased from it. Deliberately. Surgically. Like she was the smudge on an otherwise perfect photograph. She left 20 minutes later. No one stopped her. No one followed. She walked out into the night air with her heels sinking into the lawn, holding her breath like it might keep her together. It didn't. The envelope arrived with no fanfare, no courier, no signature required, just slipped under the door of her sister's apartment like a quiet whisper of finality. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Mark's. Precise, clean, no wasted flourishes. For a moment, Julia hesitated to open it. Her stomach twisted. Not with hope, but with that quiet dread that comes when you already know what's inside, and you're just hoping you're wrong. She sat at the kitchen table, the morning sun casting sharp angles across the laminate surface, and unfolded the single sheet of paper. Beneath it, a thin legal form, one she didn't need to read twice. It was the transfer of the rental apartment. To her. In full. No outstanding payments. No pending deposits. Utilities uncoupled. Lease rewritten under her name. And then, beneath it all, a handwritten note in his familiar block print. I kept my promise. You always said you didn't want to feel owned. Now you don't. That was it. No signature, no return address. Just that. She sat there staring at the words, feeling something cave in behind her ribs. There was no warmth in it. No bitterness either. Just the cold neutrality of completion. He had released her. No strings. No alimony. No lifeline. Just space, more than she ever asked for. She sank to the floor like her body had finally registered what her mind had been pretending not to know for weeks. She had gotten everything she said she wanted. Total independence. No one to answer to. No one to check in with. No "where are you" or "when will you be home." No invisible leash of concern around her wrist. Just silence. And a legally transferred apartment. She lived there now. Alone. The irony? It was the same rental she once dismissed as cramped and temporary when they considered buying a place for her cousin during grad school. Now it was hers. Permanently. Her sister wasn't home. She'd left early to take her kids to daycare and work a double shift. The place was quiet, except for the humming of the fridge and the distant sound of traffic. Julia clutched the paper like it might dissolve if she let go. Like maybe, if she just held it long enough, he'd come back and say it was a test, a phase, a punishment. But Mark wasn't like that. He didn't do scenes. He just concluded things. She curled her knees to her chest, sitting on the worn tile like a woman who had finally realized no one was coming to rescue her from a castle she burned down herself. He had made it clear in one sentence what months of shouting, apologizing, bargaining couldn't achieve. You wanted out. I let you out. Now stay there. Her pride, once a shield, felt like lead. The things she used to say, "I'm not your property, I need to breathe, I'm not built to be owned," they came echoing back, except now they were answered with silence instead of resistance. He hadn't contested, hadn't fought. He'd listened, and that was the part that broke her, because you can argue with anger, you can plead with guilt, but you can't undo someone's peace. And Mark had found his. Julia told herself it wasn't about reconciliation, not anymore. She just wanted closure, a word people use when they still secretly think they can steer the story back in their favor. She rehearsed what she'd say, not dramatic, not begging, just honest. I was confused. I crossed boundaries. I made mistakes. But can we just talk once, face to face, human to human? She typed and deleted versions of the message for 3 days before finally sending one to Mark's lawyer. Not even Mark. Just the gatekeeper. It was short, but it carried every ounce of desperation she thought she'd buried. I'd like to speak with Mark. One conversation. In person. No games. Please. She waited. Hours passed, then a full day. The reply came on letterhead. Typed, formal. No greeting. No soft landing. Mr. Wallace respectfully declines the request for a meeting. His position remains unchanged. You had a choice. You made it. He respected that more than you thought. No signature, no contact information, just the message, like a tombstone, cold, engraved, and final. Julia sat at the edge of the bed in her rented apartment, the paper in her lap. She read it twice, then three more times. Somewhere in the middle, her hand reached for her phone. She still had the number. She never deleted it. It was grayed out, marked as inactive, but still there like a scar you don't know how to hide. She dialed. Once. Twice. Silence. Then, this number is no longer in service. Disconnected. That single word rang louder than any scream. She tried to convince herself that maybe he'd changed it after all the legal formalities. Or maybe he'd moved. Maybe it was temporary. But she knew this wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about erasure. There would be no final scene, no dramatic confrontation, no teary-eyed reckoning in a coffee shop booth. Mark wasn't going to offer her the dignity of a closing chapter because she had already written it without him. Every word she'd ever thrown like a dagger, "You're boring, you never fight for anything, you let life happen to you," had aged into irony because now she wanted him to fight for one more sentence, and he wouldn't even give her a period. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above her like some mocking metaphor. Around and around, same place, no direction. In the corner of the room sat the framed photo from their trip to Sedona, crooked, cracked on one edge from the move. She kept it, not because it gave her comfort, but because it proved once there was something that she didn't imagine at all. But now, even that felt like a relic from a museum she was banned from. She thought about messaging him again. Just one line, maybe something neutral. "I hope you're okay." But she didn't. She finally understood what the silence meant. It wasn't indifference, it was closure, his, not hers. Because the truth is, some conversations don't get to happen. Some doors aren't just closed, they're sealed. And some goodbyes, they arrive without a sound. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, which somehow made it worse. Julia was standing in line at a cafe she'd started visiting because it was close and anonymous, the kind of place where no one knew her story or cared to. She ordered out of habit, not hunger, and turned to wait near the window. That's when she saw him. Mark sat at a corner table, sunlight cutting across the wood like it had been staged for him. He looked calm. Not the stiff calm of a man holding himself together, but the loose, natural kind. Laughing with two men she didn't recognize, sleeves rolled up, coffee untouched because he was mid-story. His face was open, relaxed, younger somehow. Not lighter because he'd won, lighter because he wasn't carrying anything anymore. Julia froze. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to hide, to pretend she hadn't seen him. But she didn't. She stood there, invisible, and watched like someone studying a life they used to live. She noticed the details, the way he leaned back when he laughed, the absence of that constant crease between his brows she used to blame on work, the ease with which people leaned toward him now instead of around him. He didn't look broken. He looked finished. A few minutes passed. Then the door opened and a little girl ran inside, ponytail bouncing, sneakers squeaking against the floor. She didn't hesitate. She ran straight to Mark and threw her arms around his legs. He scooped her up effortlessly, laughing, spinning her once before setting her on his lap. Julia felt the air leave her lungs. A woman followed, mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Soft smile, no performance. She touched Mark's shoulder lightly as she sat down, leaned in to say something that made him grin again. Not a grin meant to impress. A real one. They looked like a unit. Not flashy, not trying, just solid. Julia turned away before anyone noticed her staring. Her coffee was ready. She picked it up with shaking hands and walked out, heart pounding, not with jealousy, but with something heavier. Understanding. She hadn't been replaced. She'd been outgrown. Outside, the city moved like nothing had changed. Cars passed, people laughed. Somewhere a busker played a song she didn't recognize. She stood there, coffee cooling in her hand, realizing something she'd been avoiding for months. Mark hadn't rebuilt his life to spite her. He'd rebuilt it because he finally could. Her phone buzzed. One message. No name. No number saved. Just 4 words. Thanks for the push. She stared at the screen until it dimmed. Her fingers hovered, ready to type something, anything, a joke, a protest, an apology that finally landed right. But nothing came. Because what could she say? She'd wanted him smaller, quieter, easier to control. Instead, she'd taught him how to leave. Julia slid her phone into her pocket, untouched, and kept walking. The cafe door closed behind her. So did the chapter she'd spent months trying to reopen. And in that moment, she finally knew the truth she couldn't argue with anymore. The man she tried to break didn't just survive her. He became untouchable. And she was the last one to understand why.